Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Dubcast Daily as the Dubcast tackles the Women's Asian Cup. Today, we have just the one game to talk about as the last of our semi-finalists has been decided with Japan's 7-0 thumping win over the Philippines. But we also have the World Cup playoffs to preview as well, now that we know that the four sides who will be vying off for automatic qualification at the Women's World Cup on Thursday, the 19th of March. My name is Poletti. Joining me is Burke. This was one-way traffic from the get-go, wasn't it?
It really was. I mean, at the end of the game, it was, 85% possession to 15%? That really tells you everything you need to know.
Yeah, it was insane. So we're talking, 45 shots, 16 on target to 0. The Philippines did not get a single shot off in this game. I think when I checked, I want to say at like the 60-minute mark, they had 8 touches in their attacking half. 8. And 5 restarts of play for 4 goals, and the kickoff that the Philippines had to take. So 13 touches basically, in the attacking half or on the halfway line. The full-time stats, Philippines made 69 clearances to just 2 for Japan. Japan made 58 crosses to 0. 85% possession to Japan, as you already touched on, and 60% of the game took place in Japan's attacking third. That is bonkers stuff.
That's just 60% of the game being in their attacking third is crazy. That's 2/3 of the game.
Yeah.
I don't know what else to say.
I don't think there is anything else to say, to be perfectly honest. This was a game where, the talent gap was on clear display, as it has been at different points throughout this tournament. For the Philippines, it wasn't entirely, I don't want to say unexpected. Mark Torcaso spoke after the game about, how proud he was of his side and the effort that they put in. And it was something that Nils Nielsen, Japan's coach, also noted in the post-game press conference. Quote from Nils Nielsen: "We have to give credit to a side that makes an art out of defending and getting in the way all the time, and that is what happened. We were a little bit hesitant, and we didn't really get past them, and that meant that they could block pretty much every shot. And if you use your whole team for that, you can do that over a period of time." We saw the Philippines execute this unquote. We saw this, the Philippines execute this strategy against Australia, and now it's got them within 90 or 120 minutes of a World Cup because they were able to keep the goal difference down. It may not make for the most enjoyable of football, but it works.
Unfortunately, yes, it does work. They go on to play Uzbekistan in the World Cup playoffs up in the Gold Coast. So that'll be interesting for both sides. I think, personally, I would really love Uzbekistan to go through because it'd be their first World Cup, not just first women's, just first World Cup in general. So that would be really exciting for them. They made a couple changes in their side today as well, because they didn't have Angie Beard or Olivia McDaniel starting in goals for them. So I guess that would have made a difference. Not a huge one, but it would have, definitely made a difference, because we know Olivia McDaniel is a really, really talented goalkeeper as well.
Yeah, so Mark Torcaso spoke to this after the game as well. Quote from Mark Torcaso: "We had to look at the travel our girls have had since day one. We started in Perth, travelled 4 hours to Brisbane. We had to turn around 5 hours in sleep, play 2 games there, and then we travelled here to play against probably the best team in the competition. So we also have to understand that we've come off 3 very tough games and we have to rotate our players, otherwise they won't be ready and okay for every single game in the tournament. And when you look at it like unquote, I have a bad habit of doing that. And when you look at it like that, it makes sense, right? Because Chandler McDaniel came on in, I want to say it was about the 10th minute of this game after Melly Ramirez went off with an apparent knee injury. An update from Mark McCastle after the game says, Ramirez seemed to be walking around fine, so hopefully just, precautionary reasons. But Chandler McDaniel then also came off later in the game as well, in I believe it was the triple substitution window. And the reasoning for that is it was all about balancing the minutes. They had certain targets in mind for certain players, and again, just making sure that they're getting rested, they're not getting overworked, knowing full well that what's to come on Thursday. And so that was the decision behind that. Overall, look, this, as we touched on, this is a game absolutely dominated by Japan. They kept it mostly in the attacking third of the pitch. It was sort of like, when you compare it to the India game, they were able to move in the attacking third and indeed the 18-yard box with a lot more freedom. It looked more silky. It looked a lot more smooth. And some of those goals were just absolutely sublime in the India game, whereas a lot of the goals here in this game, I felt they were a little bit scrappy. Like they had to get a header from a corner. The first goal absolutely was just get it over the line by any means necessary.
Absolute scramble.
Yeah, wasn't the prettiest goal, but they don't draw pictures on the score sheet, and no one's going to remember how it happened. They're just going to remember that it happened, and they they also worked a little bit, got a little bit more fluid towards the end of the game. But again, a couple of scrappy goals, some of them coming from set pieces, which Japan said that they had worked on. They hadn't scored a set piece goal this entire tournament, which I found interesting before today. So it gives them a dual threat option now as well. They have to be aware from set pieces. Overall, I'm genuinely looking forward to Japan versus South Korea because I think it's going to be an amazing game.
Yeah, it's definitely two of the best teams in the tournament coming head to head. It's going to be a fantastic game. I think Japan might edge them out, but I think this one's going to be a real, to the wire stuff. I wouldn't be surprised if it goes into extra time either.
I mean, I have a 7 a.m. flight to the Gold Coast, so I absolutely hope it doesn't go into extra time. Otherwise, I might not get any sleep on Wednesday night. But we move. That's the joys of tournament football. We move, and sometimes getting the cheaper flight is not always the best option. But it's too late to rebook now. Obviously, with this win as well, Japan booked their spot at the 2027 Women's World Cup in Brazil. But don't ask Nils Nielsen about that because he didn't want to talk about it. After the game, quote, "We are in the middle of the tournament right now, and I am very happy that we qualified for the semi-final, so we still have a chance to win it. I have so much respect for the tournament itself, and we want to do everything to win it. When it's finished, we can talk about other things. Yes, I can tell you also that we need to improve on things. That's why we keep working on it. That's why from every game we play, we try to become better because we know that we need to become better if we want to reach our ultimate target, and that target has to be the World Cup and not this tournament. But this is a big step on the way, and it's a nice tournament, and Australia are a great host, so we owe the respect to the tournament not to start discussing World Cups and stuff now," end quote. Powerful words there, Burke, from a coach who clearly has a lot of respect for the Asian Cup.
Yeah, I think it's really, really great to hear that, especially when you've got other coaches in other places talking about how they're, going to do everything they can to make sure their players are back immediately so they can play in Europe in 4 days after the tournament ends. I'm really glad we do have people taking it seriously because this is a serious tournament. Just because it's not involving Europe or the US doesn't mean it's a lesser tournament. Japan are a huge team in women's football, not just in Asia, but in the world. So I'm very glad that he said that. And yeah, I feel Australia was doing the same sort of thing where they were focusing on the tournament. They were glad to get the qualification and get it out of the way, but really it's on, like, it's all about the tournament. That's what they're here for. I wonder if it'll change the way people approach the tournament in the future, because this is the last Asian Cup we're going to have with World Cup qualifications built into it, because we're going to have the separate qualifications for the World Cup after Brazil. So you probably won't have teams like the Philippines doing what they've done, because there's no ulterior motive. There's nothing else like happening in the background. Because I guess, it does make it hard to focus on the tournament, because, as much as you want to win, you'd want to win and do well here. You want to go to the World Cup. That's I think Joe was calling it the pinnacle of football the other night, and he's right. It is. So, yeah, I guess that'll only be a good thing for women's football, that they'll be able to fully focus their efforts on just winning this tournament and not be thinking about something that's happening next year.
Yeah, and Niels also touched on this after the game as well. I wasn't planning on asking this question when I went in to the press conference, but his answer on just wanting to give the Asian Cup the tournament that it deserved to be. What his thoughts were on the World Cup qualifying, separating from the Asian Cup itself, because this is one of only two confederations that still has the bulk of its World Cup qualifying tied to its premier confederational tournament. There are two spots up for grabs in the CONCACAF Women's Gold Cup, but six of those the other spots come from different qualification path in CONCACAF. So it's not, like I said, the majority of it isn't tied, but this is wholly tied to the Asian Cup for those six automatic spots. I don't remember exactly how it works in Africa off the top of my head, but I know the majority of it is tied to WAFCON. We're going to get into that a little bit later. Don't worry. But yeah, this was Nils Nielsen quote on that. Quote, "For me, I'm coming from Europe where we qualify in a different way, and it is less complicated to have these qualifications depending on a tournament that has its own life and has its own charm, and it's a different kind of tournament. And so I think it's a very good thing that it will change. How they will fit it in the calendar with all those games, I have no idea. But there might be something like they do in Europe with the Nations League, where all the games are competitive games instead of friendlies. I don't really know how it will be done. I'm not a logistic master, but I do know that the charm of a tournament needs to relate to that tournament and not to something else." I probably couldn't have said that better myself, to be honest.
No, it's pretty much everything that I was saying. I'm really, it's really good to hear him taking the tournament seriously, because it should be taken seriously. It shouldn't have to be the way that it has been, where, you're thinking about the World Cup, which is in a year and a few months, like a year and 3 months or whatever from now. So
yeah, indeed. Now I'm gonna pivot a little bit here. I didn't come into this podcast recording, much like I didn't go into that press conference with the plans to ask that question. You mentioned something interesting a couple of minutes ago. Coaches trying to maneuver players around and more focused on their own self-serving interest, and this is a problem with modern football. The way it is, as clubs are concerned with clubs, the national teams are obviously concerned with the national teams, but it sometimes feels like in a lot of cases that it is a one-way street, where the club is the priority and the national team is what it is. I think probably the most notable exception in women's football, certainly lately, that I can think of is Mary Fowler and Manchester City were actively, had the Asian Cup in mind as a recovery target for her, to help get her, to fitness for the Asian Cup, because they knew it was going to be one of the best places for her to be. Now, I will admit I haven't heard the full quote here, as this only came across my feed a couple of hours ago. But Mark Skinner has different thoughts, doesn't he, Burke?
Yes, he does. I'll let you.
So Mark Skinner on the 13th of March, per this tweet that I'm reading from Simon Stone, said that Man United will try to get Hinata Miyazawa back from the Asian Cup duty in time to play in the first leg against Bayern Munich. So that final will take place on the 21st of March in Sydney, the Women's Asian Cup final. We're going to get into it a little bit later, but there is every chance that Japan do play in that final. Actually, sorry, not a little bit later. We're going to get into that tomorrow with our semi-final previews. The game against Bayern Munich will be on the 25th of March at Old Trafford. The quote from Mark Skinner, from our perspective, the aim will be trying to get her back into those Bayern games and the City game, but it will be done safely, and then we'll look at afterwards. And then what we'll look at afterwards is a space where Hinny can then basically have some rest and recovery. Surely you go the rest first rather than having a player who could potentially be playing on the 21st of March in Australia going back to Europe on what... I mean, I'm not even sure how the logistics of that are going to work at the moment with everything that's going on in the Middle East in terms of, you know, closed airspace and stuff like that, because most routes back to Europe go through the Middle East now, at least through, you know, most airlines here in Australia anyway. It's usually stopovers in Qatar at the moment. Maybe they go via Singapore or something like that. I'm not too sure how that's going to work. But the point is, you're generally spending anywhere between 24 to 36 hours in the air, depending on what route you take. Maybe Qantas still do a direct flight to London. I don't know. But yeah, so you're spending a lot of time in the air, having to adjust to a time zone difference, having to adjust to a weather difference after having spent 3+ weeks in Australia, and you want to rush her back 48 hours after she's arrived back in Europe to play a game against Bayern Munich. I just let her have the night off, dude. I
think this is so insanely disrespectful to her, as a player and as just a human being. Low-key, we need to contact the UN. Human rights are not being respected in this case. I think it's just awful. That's literally what I was referring to when I made that comment. I think it's just awful. You wouldn't be saying that kind of thing if it was the Euros. You wouldn't be saying that kind of thing if it was an American player playing in, what the hell is the name of their tournament? I don't know.
The Gold Cup.
They just always end up playing Canada at the end. Is all.
Yep.
But yet you wouldn't be saying that about anyone else. You certainly wouldn't be it's unbelievable. I couldn't imagine being in that situation where my boss essentially wants me to spend a day and a half on a plane and then pretty much immediately come to work. And the work is intensely physical. It's insane. It's insane. I'm sorry. It shouldn't be allowed. Oh yeah, well, we'll do it safely. I think you're kind of telling on yourself there by then saying that she'll get rest afterwards. But what do I know? What do I know? It's awful stuff. I can't even believe he would say it on record. That's how awful I think it is. And I hope it doesn't happen. I hope she gets the game off. I hope she gets the next 2 games off. Just appalling, in my opinion.
Yep, no, I completely agree. Players need to rest. Players need recovery. They're humans. They're not machines. you're asking, let's say, you're asking a player to play what, probably 48 hours after she gets back in Europe. Jet lag is real. Jet lag sucks. I've only experienced it a couple of times in my life in terms of doing, transatlantic travel. I was out of action for a good couple of days, and that was nowhere and that was US back to Australia. That was nowhere near as long
And
as,
that's
you
not
know,
being involved in a 3.5 week long tournament.
exactly. Like, yeah.
What are we doing? What are we doing?
Yeah, and I think it's also important to note, and this is something I think a lot of people tend to forget, is they just hear, "Oh, it's the Asian Cup." This is our Euros. This is our Gold Cup. This is our preeminent continental tournament. As we've just touched on, it's tied to World Cup qualifying. This is the last time it will be tied to World Cup qualifying, but as it stands, this is tied to World Cup qualifying. Like, you're not asking a Lionesses player to come back from the Euros, and play in a final, and play in a Champions League game, 4 days after it happens. You're not doing that. Like, WAFCON isn't getting cancelled, less than a month out from the tournament is due to start. I think the official cancellation came, 12 days before the tournament was due to start. That's not happening to the Euros. If it's getting cancelled, it's getting cancelled months in advance. And spoiler alert, it's not getting cancelled unless it's a pandemic. Like it's not getting cancelled, right? So I think a lot of attitudes need to change, and it's ultimately going to be a long process. And I don't know if these things ever will change, but to wrap this all up nicely in a bow, I think comments like, the ones that Nils Nielsen made today, can go a long way to helping solve that, Burke.
Yeah, for sure. The other thing about the Women's Asian Cup is that it's the oldest women's international tournament ever. You have got to treat this tournament with respect. It's like, it predates everything by good. It predates, I think the next one is the OFC, from what I'm seeing. If I'm reading this correctly, I think I am. Yeah, which is Oceania's football tournament. And so the first Asian Cup, the Women's Asian Cup at least, was in 1975. There's been 20 of them. And then the next one, the OFC, Women's Nations Cup, was in 1983. So nearly 10 years later. This is a historic tournament. Yeah, it's tough being in this particular area because no, you don't want to respect our tournament, but you treat Japan and Australia and China and South Korea as like big threats on the global stage. I don't think these two things can happen at the same time. We can't be big threats and then our tournament mean nothing. It's a very frustrating situation to be in. I'm sure we'll probably end up having, or someone, if not us, will be having this same conversation in 4 years' time.
I hope not. I genuinely hope not. But we'll have to wait and see what happens. Before we get into our World Cup playoff previews, some fun facts for you about the Women's Asian Cup. As Burke mentioned, the first tournament took place in 1975. It was known as the Asian Cup Ladies Football Tournament. And matches were only 60 minutes in length, as they were for the first 4 editions of the tournament. China has the most titles at 9 and has participated in 11 of the 20 finals to date, including 7 straight titles between 1986 and 1999. As of the 2026 edition of the tournament, 23 nations will have competed at the Women's Asian Cup, with Bangladesh competing in its first tournament. Kazakhstan with 3 appearances and New Zealand with 1 are unable to add to their appearance tally due to being in UEFA and the OFC. In the 3rd edition of the tournament in 1980, there was a Western Australian representative side that participated in the tournament, the last Australian side to do so before Australia moved to the AFC in 2006. They were not the first Australian side to appear in the tournament. That happened in 1975, and it led to a good few decades of controversy in Australian football that still rages on to this day. That is a story for another day. And it can be told by someone else. I'm not tackling that story with a 10-foot pole. And then the last fun fact I'm going to give you today is that New Zealand is undefeated at the Women's Asian Cup. So, as I mentioned, the first edition of the tournament took place in 1975. New Zealand were an invited nation to that tournament. They won all 4 games they played and have never participated in a Women's Asian Cup since. Those are some fun facts, aren't they, Burke?
Very, very fun. I did not know that about New Zealand. That is hysterical. I love that for them.
Arrive, win 4 games, and never be seen again. They did what they needed to do. They did. I did plan to make that a separate video prior to the tournament. Had said video recorded, and before I found out that there was some audio issues with the recording, and I haven't had a chance to re-record it since. So there you go. For those of you who have been tuning into Dubcast Daily, those are your fun facts that you've been treated to throughout this tournament. Maybe I'll record a second video and hope that the audio quality actually works for the second time around. But we are going to get into our Women's World Cup playoff previews. These games are taking place on the 19th of March, so they are after the 2 semi-finals, which we will be previewing on tomorrow's Dubcast Daily. We're going to start with the 2 Sydney losing quarterfinalists, which will be Uzbekistan taking on the Philippines. On the Gold Coast, Uzbekistan made the quarterfinals by beating Bangladesh by 4-0, improving their goal difference to qualify as one of the second best third place teams, while the Philippines had a very nervy wait and have the side that knocked them out today, Japan, to thank for running up the scoreline against Vietnam. For helping them get through to the next stage of the tournament, being the quarterfinals. We've already touched on, the squad rotation for the Philippines today was, and Mark Torcaso emphasized that it was, regardless of whether that was the semi-final that was going to be next for them or whether it was going to be the World Cup playoff that was going to be next for them, they were going to do the rotation regardless. He did touch on this in his post-game press conference as well, and addressed the opposition that they've had to face so far, being Australia, South Korea, and Japan, being some of the heavyweights in the region. Quote from Mark Torcaso: "I'm really glad you said that in regards to the question on the opposition he's faced so far." Because it's not publicized enough that the Philippines have played the 3 best teams in Asia, I believe, and we've done a damn good job at doing that. And I think now that we are in a position where we've set ourselves up because of that very first game against Australia, we've set ourselves up in a position where we can qualify. So it definitely takes a toll on the players because they have to work extremely hard defensively against these teams. But now we've got a really good focus on what we need to do against Uzbekistan. I think, and as I said, Mark Torcaso noted it when the question was asked by AAP's George Clark, that it's certainly something I had overlooked. Like, I obviously knew they'd faced Australia, they'd faced South Korea, and that they'd faced Japan, but you didn't really piece together that, like, these are 3 of the tournament heavyweights, and they've all got a good chance at actually going on to win this tournament. Like, that's a horror run for any side of the tournament, isn't it?
Yeah, no one's going to enjoy that. No one's going to enjoy that game. Those, like, 3 games. So it has been a really, really tough draw for them. So yeah, I do see that as well for them. I think I hope they haven't defended themselves into the ground that they can't get into the game against Uzbekistan, if that makes sense. Like they've spent pretty much all of their games except for the game against Iran defending for 90 minutes. So I hope they've remembered how to attack as well.
I think the Iran game has given them the opportunity to show that they can do that. Again, funnily enough, coming up against a defense that sat in a low block for much of that game as well. The hunter has become the hunted, I think, is probably the you know what people say about that sort of stuff. I don't know. But yeah, it was interesting. I think the way Uzbekistan have played football so far at this tournament, I think that like yeah, they kind of parked the bus a little bit against South Korea, but for the most part, they have played football that's a little bit open, a little bit expansive. That's been a little bit rough and tumble as well, and we saw that. I mean, you just have to have a look at the amount of yellow cards that they've racked up through the tournament to date. I think, like, if you look at that Bangladesh game, when they went against a team of similar quality, they were able to open things up. They were able to exploit. They were able to show off their attacking prowess. They were able to show off their skill level. And do I think the Philippines are a better side than Uzbekistan? I do. Do I think that, given that one of, for both sides, I think pre-tournament goal, make the quarterfinals, have a shot to go to the World Cup. I think we're going to see two sides that are very evenly matched. I think we're going to see two sides that want to play attacking football, but understand that the realities haven't necessarily allowed them to. We've touched on this a little bit already in the sense that, like Uzbekistan's side, is stacked with players from NASAF who are going to play Melbourne City in a Women's Champions League quarter-final coming up at the end of the month. Like that shows that there's talent in this squad. For as much as the vast majority of the squad plays in, Uzbekistan's domestic league, there's still talent there to get to the knockout stages of the Women's Champions League, as young as that competition is in its history and its current format. The Philippines, I mean, they've been to a World Cup. They've won a World Cup game, admittedly not under Mark Torcaso, but under, another Australian coach, Alan Stajic. They know what they need to do. These players are talented. I think we're going to be in for a very good game of football. I think this game, I think of the two games, if either of them are going to go to extra time, I think it'll be this one. I wouldn't be surprised if this is like a 2-2 after 90 minutes. Like I think there's going to be goals here. I think it's going to be exciting football to watch. I think, as unfortunate as it will be for me personally, because I need to check into my hotel between games on the Gold Coast, I think that this game's going to go to extra time. I'm gonna say the Philippines will go through as eventual winners, but I also wouldn't be surprised if it's Uzbekistan. I know I'm sitting on the fence there, but I think it's I just think this is two very evenly matched teams that both want to get to the World Cup, and they're going to come out and play football that reflects that, but in an attacking sense, not necessarily in a park the bus defensive sense. And we're sitting at 0-0 after 90 minutes because neither side wants to go on the attack.
Yeah, I have to agree with everything you've said. I hope I I hope we do get a good few goals. It's a lot more fun when both the teams are scoring goals, in my opinion, at least. So yeah, I hope we do get a few goals from each side.
Yep, and we're going to turn our attention now to the other World Cup playoff game from the two teams that are on the Perth side of the bracket. North Korea, who lost to Australia and Chinese Taipei, who lost to China after extra time. Look, this is a tough one, right? Because Chinese Taipei have been incredible at playing defensive football throughout this tournament. They held Japan scoreless for, I think, for about 60 minutes on match day one. They were able to beat the Philippines. Not the Philippines. They were able to beat Vietnam on match day two in honking hot conditions, as we touched on when that game happened. And they held out for, over 100 minutes against China, I think. Like, maybe, when you include stoppage time in the first and second half, I think the goal came, right at the start of extra time or close to the start. But when you add in stoppage time, like, they held out for a very long time against China. I want to say their defensive resilience will get them over the line, but I've also seen a lot of North Korea at this tournament. They are going to come out very pissed off at the fact that they couldn't beat Australia. They didn't like the fact that they lost to China. They're probably on, statistical dominance, would feel very hard done by having not at least taken Australia to extra time. What happens there is, anyone's guess. We live in the world where Australia beat North Korea inside the 90 minutes. This is a side that's made its return, to the international football stage outside of the Olympic qualifiers, a couple of years back, where they ultimately lost to Japan. This is their first Asian Cup since 2010. This is, a chance to go to their first World Cup since 2011. If there's one thing I've learnt about this side in the last couple of weeks, is they are going to be desperate to get back to the world stage. And I don't know how, maybe Chinese Taipei's defense can hold out, but I'm not convinced it's going to hold out for as long as it did against Japan or China. I see this being 2-0, 3-1 sort of game. But I see North Korea going through inside 90 minutes.
Yeah, again, we just all the correct takes today, it seems. I definitely agree with everything you say. I hope Chinese Taipei put through another great defensive performance. I'm sure they will, but we've seen how North Korea play and how good they are at breaking lines. So, yeah, it wouldn't surprise me at all if this ends up being like a 2-0 kind of game in 90 as well. I imagine they're all probably incredibly tired as well after everything that they've been through, especially the game that got dragged out into the extra time as well.
Yeah, I don't think it can be understated the fact that North Korea, they'll have, well, maybe not an extra 24 hours, but like an extra 12 to 16 hours recovery time. A little bit less football on the legs. As exhausting as that football was, against Australia from an attacking opportunity, and I think you saw it on the North Korean players' faces at the end of the 90 minutes. Like, they look drained, they look exhausted. Obviously, they were upset that they weren't going to have a chance to go on and win the Asian Cup. But you could see how much that game took out of them. And you saw it on their faces as well of the Chinese Taipei players as well, like how much that game took out of them as well. As much as it would suck for Chinese Taipei, I think this is going to be a pretty dominant display from North Korea. Any final thoughts on the games we saw today, Burke, or the game we saw today, or the World Cup playoffs?
Most I have to say is it's crazy that Japan has scored 24 goals over 4 games. And they've had like 12 or so different goal scorers, which is also an unreal number. Yeah, that's more than a starting 11's worth of names. On the one hand, this bodes well for Alana Kennedy's chance at winning the Golden Boot. On the other hand, this does mean that they are a threat at literally every single point on the pitch. So, swings and roundabouts, I guess. But yeah, I'm really looking forward to all the games we have left. I think they're all going to be absolute crackers.
Yeah, and that probably goes to show why so many of us, myself included, were very worried pre-tournament when it seemed like the Matildas and Japan were on a collision course in the semi-final, but they've both ended up on different sides of the draw. But that will do for this episode of Dubcast Daily. For Burke, my name is Poletti. Thank you so much for tuning in, and be sure to tune in tomorrow when we take a look at both the semi-final fixtures ahead of what is said to be two cracking games to decide who will meet in the Asian Cup final. Thank you so much for tuning in.